So, good morning, everyone. This is session for diploma, third semester, multimedia and animation. And topic of today's discussion is multimedia hardwares. So, when we are talking about hardware, what is hardware? क्या होता है जी hardware? So, what is hardware, everyone? Yes, Navdeep Singh, what is hardware?
Physical part of a computer.
ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਛੂ ਕੇ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹ ਹਾਰਡਵੇਅਰ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਜੀ
Very
ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ
right.
CPU ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਜੀ
Vajan and Kiran, thank you for your reward. So, anything which is in physical, which are tangible, they are considered as your hardware devices, right? So, these are the physical devices which are attached to your computers. And when we are talking about physical devices, maybe any device to which you can touch and that can have some weight. The specific hardware platform is a basic need of every multimedia system. So hardware जो है उनके बिना तो कुछ भी नहीं हो सकता है, ठीक है? अगर हम मेमोरी की बात करें, हमारी रैम है, then we have hard disks, primary memory, secondary memories. So अगर हमारे पास हार्ड डिस्क ही नहीं होगी, रैम ही नहीं होगी, तो हम डेटा स्टोर कहाँ करवाएंगे? So ultimately we need to have some hardware to process our programs. अगर हमारे पास प्रोसेसर ही नहीं है तो प्रोसेसिंग कौन करेगा, राइट? सो इसलिए हम कहते हैं कि सिस्टम को कोई भी प्रोग्राम एग्जीक्यूट करना है तो उसको हार्डवेयर की रिक्वायरमेंट है. And as I have mentioned, the multimedia files require high speed CPU, high volume of RAM and huge storage volumes, because these files are very heavy, because they are the combination of images, videos, audios, text. So definitely these files are heavy and we need to have bulk of storage space to store these files. They need several type of input and output devices also. So when we are talking about input and output devices, what strikes to our mind first? We have keyboard, we have mouse. So these are your input devices. Your monitor, projectors, they are comes under output devices, the display devices. So in sub components ke bina multimedia is nothing. Multimedia is dependent on all these hardwares. So when we are talking about multimedia system, अगर कोई भी आपने सिस्टम लेना है, उसकी कॉन्फ़िगरेशन, बेसिक कॉन्फ़िगरेशन क्या होनी चाहिए जिसपे कि आप मल्टीमीडिया सॉफ्टवेयर्स, मल्टीमीडिया फाइल्स एग्जीक्यूट कर सकें. So the configuration of multimedia computer is little higher and sophisticated as compared to normal personal computers. The multimedia applications depends fast CPUs, high volume of main memory and secondary storage, like we need to have CDs, additional CDs, DVDs also. And they require larger screens to display, high resolution printers, scanners, optical mouses, touch screen, graphic tables, speakers maybe, or card readers and voice recognition system. So all these are the specifications, all these are the requirements of multimedia system. So when we are talking about the configuration of multimedia system, it must have a CPU with at least a speed of 3 gigahertz and main board of, let's say, 800 megahertz front side bus, and it must have 80 to 200 GB hard disk. RAM must be of minimum of 512 MB to the maximum of 400 megahertz of frequencies. It must have digital video disc writers, multimedia keyboards, optical mouses. So all these devices we'll discuss one by one in our coming sessions. Also, it may include color monitors. Definitely without colored monitors or high resolution display units, there is no fun of multimedia, because multimedia is what? When we need to visualize something in a very impactful manner. So this is why we need to have high resolutions. So moving ahead, the system must include processor. Without processor, there is almost nothing, because it is the processor which instructs all the devices to execute. It is the processor who actually switches between the various resources and instruct all your hardwares to perform certain tasks which the multimedia softwares are instructing, which the multimedia users are instructing. So there are certain options for processors that are nowadays available in the market. We may have core to dual or dual core processors, and they allotted and they function according to their specifications. So there are certain companies who are manufacturing good processors, one of which is definitely Intel. So you can opt for this. And another category set of uh, devices that are required is your memory and storage devices. So under memory and storage, when we need to store anything, right, we opt for these devices. And what actually a storage device is? Definitely we know our software, our storage device is used in computers to store the data. So whatsoever the required data is, maybe the image, the video, or the complete multimedia file, we need to store it somewhere, and for that we use storage devices. And these storage devices provide one of the core functions of the modern computers. Without storage devices, our systems would be nothing. They can just act as maybe then a communicator. We can transfer our data from one system to another, but we cannot store it in our system. So definitely there are certain types of storage devices. We have primary storage, we have secondary storage. So when we are talking about primary storage, they are also known as main memory. And main memory is directly or indirectly connected to the central processing unit via memory bus. So the CPU continuously reads the instruction which are stored there and execute them as required. The main examples of primary storage we have is ROM, RAM, and cache. We have these three types of primary memories into which we can store our data. So when we are talking about RAM, it is called random access memory because any of the data in RAM can be accessed just as fast as any other data. And there are two types of RAMs. We have dynamic random access memory and static random access memory. So we'll discuss all these in detail when we'll proceed to storage devices. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट सेशन में हम स्टोरेज डिवाइसेस इन डिटेल करेंगे, उसमें हम इनकी डिस्कशंस करेंगे. So moving ahead, next category we have is secondary storage. So when we are talking about secondary storage, it is not directly accessible by the CPU. CPU से हम directly access नहीं कर सकते हैं secondary storages को, and computers usually uses its input and output channels to access secondary storage and transfer the desired data using intermediators. So example here is hard disk we have, and any other additional storages like we have USB. Our CPU cannot access USB as such directly or hard disk as such directly. So it need to instruct or need to access these devices by input output channels. So next category of hardware that is required here is your input and output devices. So when we are talking about input devices, the devices which are used to supply input to the computer are called input devices. कोई भी इंस्ट्रक्शन जब यूजर ने या आउटसाइड वर्ड से हमें कंप्यूटर में देनी है तो उसको हम किसकी हेल्प से देंगे? इनपुट डिवाइसेस की हेल्प से देंगे. और हमारे पास बहुत सारे इनपुट डिवाइसेस अवेलेबल हैं जिनके थ्रू हम इंस्ट्रक्शंस, डेटा, इंफॉर्मेशन ट्रांसफर करते हैं कंप्यूटर में, which includes most common input devices, which is called your keyboard, and then we have mouse and another sophisticated devices like we have touch screens, light pens. They are also input devices. Touch screens are mostly used for developing multimedia kiosks. So आपने काफी जगह पे like ATMs भी है इस तरह के हमारे पास जो टच स्क्रीन से हैं, जहां आप इंस्ट्रक्शंस जो है कोई भी स्क्रीन को टच करके ऑप्शन को चूज करके फॉरवर्ड करके. ठीक है, सो व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट मल्टीमीडिया kiosks, a touch of finger is enough to supply input to the system. और ये इनपुट कैसे होती है? कुछ आइकन्स होते हैं या कुछ इंफॉर्मेशन होती हैं, कुछ बटन्स होती हैं, उन पे आप अपनी फिंगर से जब टच करते हैं, क्लिक करते हैं, देन द इंफॉर्मेशन इज ट्रांसफर टू द सिस्टम. So we can say a device which are used to supply input to the computer are called your input devices. So next, moving ahead, if we talk about specifically about the keyboard, what is a keyboard? It is kind of a board with some keys over it. So a standard keyboard have around 104 keys, right? So there are certain different keys over a keyboard which have numeric keys, character keys, special keys and function keys. And when we talk about numeric keys are what? आपने अपने कीबोर्ड के राइट साइड में देखा होगा कुछ कीज दिए हैं न्यूमेरिकल्स में, टॉप पे भी है न्यूमेरिकल्स में कुछ कीज, इसी तरह ही कुछ कैरेक्टर कीज हैं जैसे A to Z स्मॉल्स में, कैपिटल्स में. देन वी हैव शिफ्ट, रिटर्न एंड अदर कीज जो इनकी फंक्शनैलिटी चेंज भी करती है, इनकी अपीयरेंस चेंज करती है. देन वी हैव स्पेशल कीज like we have home, end, insert, delete, control and alt, which serve special purposes like cursor control, deletion or moving a page full of information like up and down. And then we have another category of keys which is function key. These keys are arranged at the topmost row of the कीबोर्ड. यू मस्ट हैव सीन, आपने F1, F2 इस तरह से F12 तक कीज देखी होंगी अपने कीबोर्ड्स में. सो दे सर्व अ स्पेशल पर्पस आल्सो. The another category of input device we have is mouse. So mouse is another popular input device that is generally used in graphic user interface. A mouse is a pointing device, right? So which is used to supply input through its graphical representation, which is called cursor. And the mouse contains one of three buttons to perform different operations. You have a right click, left click, or a ball attached to it. So accordingly, it rotates, it moves the cursor over your screen over x-axis and y-axis of pixels. Next input devices we have is joystick and light pen. They are also the input devices. So joystick is somewhat act as your mouse, right? So apart from scrolling the mouse, we have a handle over a joystick which we moves in a direction where we want to move our cursor. So mainly these joysticks are used in gaming softwares. And then we have another device which is light pen. Light pen is another pointing device that can be directly used to draw lines on the screen. And the light pen contains a photocell that is placed on the pen, and whenever this cell is brought closer to the screen, it senses the light coming from the screen. इसमें सेंसर्स होते हैं जो लाइट रिकॉग्निशन करते हैं और उसी के अकॉर्डिंग उसकी इनपुट्स जाती है. So these pulses are transmitted to a signal processor that identifies the particular pixel of the monitor where the pen is touching. So in cricket matches, the commentators marks a portion of screen while explaining a particular area or the field set or particular slot of batsman. You must have seen in the highlights while commenting. So when they highlight certain areas or certain positions, it is done with the help of light pens. Then apart from this, we have trackball and scanner. These are another input devices. So trackball is also a pointing device which is quite similar to mouse, except one difference, that is the trackball which is attached over it. So rather than moving the device, we move the ball which is been attached over it. ये जो इसके ऊपर बॉल है हम इसको मूव करते हैं, उसी के कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग कर्सर्स जो है मूव होते हैं स्क्रीन में, हम डिवाइस को मूव नहीं करते हैं इसमें. एंड ट्रैक बॉल आल्सो हैव बटन like mouse. It is used to position the cursor at a specific location and the input is supplied by pressing buttons attached with trackballs. Then we have scanners. You must have seen the scanners also. So scanner is the other popular input device. They are used to transfer printed or handmade pictures or drawing into computer. Let's say आपके पास कोई भी drawing है, कोई image है, कोई हार्ड कॉपी है पेपर की, आप उसको सॉफ्ट में कन्वर्ट करना चाहते हैं, उसको आप सेव करना चाहते हैं एज अ सॉफ्ट कॉपी इन योर सिस्टम, तो आप उसको स्कैनर से स्कैन कर सकते हैं और इनपुट आपके सिस्टम में चली जाएगी, जिसको आप सेव कर सकते हैं या प्रोसेस कर सकते हैं. So they are generally used to transfer pictures or drawings. They are comparatively cheaper and available in different models and resolutions. So the original graphic is placed on a clear glass under which the scanner moves its scanning optics. It sprays light on the paper and the reflected light is read by charged coupled devices. So this is how it transfers. It scans the paper and transfers it into the system. So scanners come with various sizes and resolutions, and they input the hard copies of documents to your system. Next, we have digitizers, and then we have magnetic ink card readers. They are also the input devices. So when we are talking about the digitizers, they also take the input with their digital screens and transfer it as an instructions to your system. And when we are talking about magnetic card readers, they are also like we have the cards like for ATM card, and it contains a magnetic strips on their back to store important confidential data like passwords of your ATM. Maybe we have smart cards or smart card reader in the devices that decode the data which is stored in these magnetic strips, and hence the information can be transferred from the card to your system. So this is how they can be used. Then apart from this, we can have certain voice systems with us. They are also act as input devices as well as output devices, right? So voice system हम यूज करते हैं इनपुट देने के लिए भी. लेट्स से हम हमारे सिस्टम को बोल के कुछ इंस्ट्रक्शंस देना चाहते हैं, दैट कैन बी डन. एंड ऑल्सो अगर हमारा सिस्टम वॉइस में ऑडियोज में कुछ रिवर्ट बैक करना चाहता है, इट कैन बी डन विद द हेल्प ऑफ स्पीकर्स. So one category of voice systems we have is microphone. It is also an input device that is used to transfer the sound to the computer system. So microphones are basically plugged into sound input slot on the sound card of your computers. As more and more people has started using computers for listening and reading, recording music and chatting or maybe conferencing. So microphones are nowadays quite popular. Everyone use it. And another set of device we use is your speakers. They act as output devices. They are the audio output devices, right? So they use to produce the sound as an output. They convert the digital signals coming from your computer system to analog sound waves, and they comes under several sizes. They work over different voltage, and a personal computer generally contain like 210 to 500 volt speakers. which produce sound outputs for a small room. And to cover bigger area, we use amplified speakers, woofers that can be used. So this way, they act as the audio output devices. So we have certain more categories of devices, like we have capturing device, we have output devices, and then another components of multimedia we have are multimedia softwares that we need to have, and we will discuss all these categories in our next session. So we are running out of time and we'll be continuing with the same discussion in our next session. All right. So if anyone wants to ask anything as if now, please ask.